Welcome on board the Rich Planet Starship, broadcasting from somewhere high above the Earth. I'm Richard D. Hall, and I'm going to kick things off by taking a look at some of this week's news items. First off, Barack Obama has cancelled any future manned missions to the moon. The last one was in 1972, and astronauts were incensed by this decision. And one day, perhaps we'll learn the real reason for this decision. An alleged suicide bomber in the UK tried to gain employment as a temporary cabin crew member in order to carry out a terrorist attack. IT expert Rajib Karim, aged 30, allegedly indicated that he could be trained to stand in for the striking cabin crew and offered to use it as an opportunity for a terrorist attack. Prosecutor Colin Gibbs said that Karim had a clear intention and desire to offer himself for terrorist attacks and achieve martyrdom. Now, I would say, how do you know that someone has the intention until they've actually carried out the attack? This smells to me of yet another false flag event by the intelligence agencies. And it's almost as preposterous as the underpant bomber case. Moving on, and in New York City, officials have agreed to pay up $657 million to thousands of rescue workers who were working in the cleanup event after 9/11. The settlement would compensate more than 10,000 plaintiffs who say they were made sick by dust at the ground zero site of the attacks. Now, what is significant for this to me is the fact that the authorities are admitting that there was huge quantities of strange dust that no one has an explanation for at the site of 9/11. Now, does this not add weight to the theory that some kind of advanced energy weapon was used to bring the towers down? Moving on, and it's come to our attention that strange planet-sized spheres some people are calling UFOs have been photographed in close proximity to the sun. The images were taken by NASA's SOHO unmanned spacecraft, which monitors the sun and broadcasts images of the sun on its website. The spheres are about the size of planet Earth and started showing up round about the 18th of January this year. Now, NASA have passed these images off as mere compression artifacts, highly magnified. In other words, there's some kind of photographic anomaly. But some people believe that NASA are continuing to cover up these images, and people are coming up with various different theories, such as the objects are in fact spacecraft entering our solar system through the sun, and the sun is a stargate which connects to a black hole in another galaxy. Okay, and finally, on Sunday the 7th of March, during the night over a quiet Somerset house, scores of swooping starlings tumbled out of the sky for no apparent reason and landed in somebody's front garden. More than 100 birds were found, each with blood oozing from its beak and curled up claws. It's a mystery, and no one seems to have an explanation for this bizarre event. One would assume that possibly some kind of gas or chemicals caused this, but you would then think, well, what on earth is poisonous gas doing in the air above Somerset? Okay, it's time to introduce this week's guest. And I've interviewed this week's guest many times before. He's an expert in ufology, he's an expert in animal mutilation and crop circles. So without further ado, let's activate the teleporter and get him beamed up onto the ship. It's David Cayton. Welcome, David. Have a seat. Welcome on board the Starship, David.
Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you.
How did you
Very pleased to be here.
How did you find the teleportation?
Well, okay. I'm on tablets for vertigo, so it's perhaps a good thing.
Right.
I don't want to look out of the window too much, you see.
Right.
So anyway, first of all, I'd like to say how delighted I am and pleased to be your first guest on the launch of your Starship Enterprise.
Well,
and
thanks
I
for coming in.
hope it goes successfully, and perhaps you'll get Captain Kirk on one day.
Well, perhaps. Who knows? Right. Well, you've come in today, David, or we've beamed you up today to talk about British ufology that you've been involved with for sort of the last 20 years or so,
Yeah,
and from the late 1980s. And
yeah.
how did you get involved? Who was it that sort of got you involved in the ufology scene originally?
Well, it was Roy Dutton, him and I were still working at British Aerospace. I think it was 1989. In fact, all my comments are sort of just my perception and my personal things that happened interfacing with ufologists and so on. So I haven't made a particular study of ufology from A to Z, you know, for me.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was Roy who triggered me off and showed me crop circle pictures over the lunch table and this sort of thing. And he said, why not sign up and subscribe to the Bufora magazine?
Bufora, that's British UFO Research Association,
I believe.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. And it was quite expensive then. It was £25 a year or something. And I was quite disappointed with the magazine. It was quite boring and no illustrations and nothing exciting. It really fired me up. And I got the sort of feeling from editorial comments and things that the people running the magazine, the editorial team, were somewhat more than sceptical. Which
Non-believers, I think, a lot of them.
Well, I didn't perceive that at the time, but yes.
People in Bufora tend to try and explain everything away in normal everyday terms. Would you agree with that?
Yes, and again, to attempt to do that, you could argue, is not a bad thing in essence, but I think as time's gone on, they've probably gone over the top on that. It has the effect of putting people off. So anyway, I didn't renew after 12 months subscription. I didn't fancy another 25 quid for some boring stuff. And I think Roy also discontinued.
Right.
So I've never been a member of a Bufora group, UFO group, or anything like that.
So that was probably the main, establishment group, if you could call it that.
Yes, I think
and Quest International, who you joined in '93, was probably a bit more open-minded, would you say?
Yes, and they came along from an original, I think it was called the Yorkshire UFO group, where back in Graham and Mark Birdsall kicked it off, and then Tony Dodd joined them. I think he was probably still a serving officer originally. I'm not too sure. He might have retired.
And they started the magazine.
And they eventually started the UFO magazine, which I was very impressed with.
Yes, I've seen copies of that, and it is a superb, or was a superb magazine. It's not running anymore now.
But Tony, as a personality, was the guy that really fired me up. And I thought if he'd stuck his head over the parapet by reporting a sighting on duty with two other officers in 1978, I think it was, and despite the wishes of the other two guys, he made a formal report to his superiors, which actually affected his police career and his promotion. So I thought, for a guy to do that, that impressed me. So when I took a retirement from British Aerospace in January '93, later in the year, I contacted Tony and said, do you need another researcher, investigator for the Greater Manchester area? And he said, so I'd give him a background of what I've been doing, and he said, yeah, fine, sign me up. Got my badge. Should have brought.
And you then started going to conferences in Leeds, I believe?
Yes, they didn't have formal conferences in those days.
Right.
They had informal meetings at an old building called Centenary House in Leeds. I think it was monthly. And it was a very relaxed, open sort of forum thing. Graham and Mark would talk about certain subjects and topics. They would invite people from the floor who had some experience to come up. You even got me on my feet twice, I think, about some events in the Manchester area. And then eventually they decided to invite outside keynote speakers. And they got Bob Dean speak there, and Colonel Wendell Stevens. And they were terrific. And then Graham, I think, eventually started to do more formal public conferences, and it sort of went on from there.
And was it that group that covered the alien autopsy? Did they have that at their conference? And I think '95, or was that a different group?
No, it was Quest.
It was Quest.
Everyone was talking about it because in '95, that's when Ray Santilli actually released this
alien autopsy video footage.
The earth-shaking thing, which was going to be the smoking gun for ufology, all that. And it's supposed to be 1940s cine film
yeah.
of an alien body,
yeah.
and surgeons, taking the organs out and cutting it up, etc.
Yes.
And
I just mentioned there Keith Goodyear, who's an executive producer at Edge Media. He was instrumental in actually revealing that thing was a fake, because he recognised someone on the tape who he knew from a TV studio.
Dear me, yeah.
Yeah. So,
Anyway,
yes, carry on, David.
so this was one of the main featured events at that early Leeds conference. And it's the first time I'd actually seen and heard Linda Moulton Howe speak, and Michael Hesman, the German chappie, they were on the platform extolling the virtues of the Santilli film. Sort of supporting that it was genuine.
Yes.
And I didn't disagree entirely. And Linda was sort of saying...
So you thought it was a fake from the word
Yeah,
go?
yeah.
Right.
And I wasn't impressed with the military, ex-RAF as I was, as a photographer. I thought no military photographer was going to make such a crappy job of such an important event. If it was real, it would be a really important event. They wouldn't have one camera and handheld and kept going out of focus. Very unprofessional. And in fact, the guy, if he was in the military, would have been bloody court-martialed for the terrible job he did of it. And of course, I didn't appreciate then the commercial interest that Linda and Michael Hesman had in promoting that in their magazines, websites. Well, perhaps websites weren't going then, but going on conference platforms.
Yeah.
So at question time, I stuck my hand up and said my piece. Well,
Okay.
I think it was probably not genuine.
Right. And then moving on from that, there was a conference at Southport, I believe.
Yes. That was again in the 90s, late 90s.
Late 90s.
Yeah. And that was organised by Tim Matthews and Eric Morris. And again, it was mainly a Bufora thing. And Harry Harris, who I met earlier, who was into abductees and having them hypnotically regress, etc. And Linda Taylor, one of the abductees, and myself were sort of invited to participate. And because at the end of the conference, they planned an open debate about abductions.
Right.
And the whole thing was a debacle. It was a fight.
Right.
Two guys gate crashed in
and
started shouting and bawling out at Tim Matthews.
Right.
And there was a bit of a fight and a scuffle while they ejected those guys. And then some Bufora speakers, like there was Jenny Randalls, Peter Brooksmith, Gloria Dixon, who was the president of Bufora at the time.
And alien abduction was one of the main themes of that conference.
Well, no, the main speakers were talking about anything.
Right. Okay.
But so Jenny Randalls, and I was shocked because in her talk she started to talk about Rendlesham Forest event in 1980, and I thought this should be good. I mean, she was directly involved in researching that case in the first place with Dot Street and Brenda Butler, Harry Harris, and I think a retired police superintendent called Norman Collinson, who was friendly with Harry. And she produced a book called Sky Crash in association with Dot Street and Brenda Butler. And they actually got the national press, and they ended up with the News of the World to break the news that it's official, a UFOs landed in Suffolk.
Right.
So having capitalised on this case for so many years, I couldn't believe my ears when she starts to ridicule and debunk the Rendlesham Forest.
Okay. So what was her explanation for what the Rendlesham UFO was?
I honestly can't remember. I wish I could.
Right. Okay. And a lot of the Rendlesham witnesses are, I've heard, going to get together later on this year, all in the UK somewhere. I don't think they've announced a venue or anything like that. The likes of Jim Penniston and Larry Warren and Charles Holt, all the people who saw the triangular-shaped UFO come and land in Rendlesham Forest, all military, highly trained witnesses. Yeah.
Well, I'd met Colonel Holt, and we spent some days with him, and he came to do the Strange But True program with ITV with Michael Aspel, and Harry Harris had organised this end, everything, and apart from the TV stuff, we'd had a conference of Charles speaking in Manchester, one in Todmorden, which Alan Godfrey organised, and Graham Birdsall did one for Quest in Leeds, and I ferried him around. with Harry and Linda and one or two other people from where he was staying in Manchester to the venues, and we could set up some recording gear, a PA system for doing his talks, apart from the Leeds Quest did their own thing on that one. So I got to know him quite well, and I had no doubt the things he was saying, and having met the man, that it was a genuine event.
Okay then, David. Well,
So to hear Jenny Randall's poo-pooing it was a shock.
right.
So,
Well, we're going to go for a short commercial break now, David, and we'll hear more from David Cayton after this break. Don't go away.